We're working on the final challenge for strings in the Enumerate lesson. We're told to write the logic necessary to iterate through a sentence and add each word to a sentence list. So at the end of the challenge, sentence list should equal I wonder how this will work. In addition to this, we want to create an additional list named indices, which is parallel to the list that indicates the starting index for each word. Indices in the end should equal 0, 2, 9, 13, 18, and 23. So I can see here that I've got some starter code that includes an empty list, sentence list to gather my words, and indices. And I see that when indices is instantiated, we're making the assumption that the first word is going to be starting at index 0. So we know that's, we can make the assumption or know that's when our first word is going to start. Or we can assume that our sentence is not going to start with an empty space. So what we're going to need to do is, first thing, right, I'm going to need some sort of variable to capture each of the words as we iterate through all the characters in the sentence. So I think at any one time, I'm only going to be using one word, and then when I reach the end of that word, I'm going to go ahead and append it onto my list. So before I go too deep into things, I'm going to just write myself a little outline with some comments so I know what it is that I need to accomplish. The first thing I'm doing is declaring a variable to use to accumulate our words into. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I want to iterate through all the characters. And let's say that if the character is a blank space, then I'm going to want to do something. First thing I need to check is if, actually, before we move on to that, right, let's just take care of what I'm going to need to do. If the character is a blank space, then we know after it, we can make the assumption there's only one space between words. After it, we're going to want to append that index plus 1 to my indices list. So let's append index plus 1. I know that's when the next word will start to indices. But here, I was a little hesitant because there's something else. I'm not going to do this all the time. There's one case if my index is equal to 0, that is, if I'm at the very beginning of my sentence, I don't actually want to append that. So let's say if index is not equal to 0, then I will go ahead and append index plus 1 to my indices list. Now, that's great for taking care of the indices list, but we do need to also take care of the list, actually appending the word to our list. So whatever the word is at that point, and I'll go ahead and say if the character is a blank space, then what we're going to need to do is sentence list dot append. Oops, I should be writing comments here. If, excuse me, not if, I just want to append whatever the current word was previously, the word that we've been working on before we encountered the space. to our sentence list. And lastly, I'm going to want to go ahead and I can reset current word. I've reached the end of a word. I know that I've got a space, and then I'm going to move on and start working at a new word. So I want to go ahead and reset that current word variable, so we're not just adding on to the end of a word that already exists. Now, we do need to take care of the situation when if the character isn't a blank space, then I just want to concatenate that letter to my current word. Now, the last thing that I'm going to need to do is when I reach the end of this for loop, I'm going to, unless there's a space at the end of it, which if I look at sentence, there is not a space at the end of it, I'm going to have some data in current word that represents a word and maybe, in this case, a piece of punctuation, but it has not been appended to my sentence list just yet. So the last thing I'm going to do is append the last current word to sentence list. So this might feel like it's overkill a little bit with the comments, and it really is, but taking this approach when you get into more complicated problems such as this one can really help you sort through your logic and make the actual writing of the function pretty easily. Maybe one thing I left off here, including a variable that represents the index value. So, right, I know that for my index and my character in enumerate of my iterable, in this case, the string sentence. So now I'm getting an index number, which is great, as well as the character itself. So let's say if the character is a blank space, we can simply, if character is equal to a blank space, then I want to check my next condition. If the index is not equal to 0, or let's make this a little more Pythonic, if not index equals to 0, then let's go ahead and say indices dot append index plus 1, just like my comment says. We'll just skip that if the index is not equal to 0, and we can go ahead and move on with the rest of our directions in this for loop, in particular this if the character is a blank space. So I want to append the current word to our sentence list. So let's simply sentence list dot append and current word. And then the last step that I need to do is to reset this current word to an empty string. So that takes care of that. Now I need to work this second condition. That is, if the character isn't a blank space, then I'm going to want to go ahead and add that on to my current word, right? Using concatenation or the addition operator. So I'll simply say current word plus equals my character. And then I did have this last instruction that I need to take care of, and that is simply to whatever word is left in current word, at the end of my function needs to be appended as well. And I think that my logic is sound. I'm going to be in good shape. I'm actually just going to come through and sort of kill some of these comments that I made, just so this code is a bit more readable. I think in general, Python code is pretty easy to write in a way in which it is readable in its nature, and you want to make sure, like I am here, you're using variable names that make sense, so I can understand what this function is doing even without the comments. And as we get rid of these comments, we really start to end up with something that's a bit more readable. I'm going to go ahead and run the tests here, and hopefully we do see that it's correct. So hopefully this all makes sense, and if it doesn't, you can always feel free to reach out to us on Slack.